NASA opens proposals for Moon and Mars communication systems, JAXA fires up a new design of its H3 rocket, Blue Origin shows off lunar lander hardware, SpaceX fishes out Starship hardware from the water, and astronomers may have finally found a companion for Beetlejuice. As always, we'll have all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. This week we had a bunch of news coming from the US, so let's get into it. We'll start with NASA, because just recently the agency released a request for proposals asking companies to propose their own concepts for a Moon and Mars relay communication system. The request for proposals, often referred to as an RFP, is part of NASA's efforts to commercialize the communication systems. We've talked about this in previous episodes, especially when it comes to the Tracking and Data Relay System, or TDRS, that the agency currently uses to communicate with several of its missions. NASA's been wanting to phase that system out and instead use commercial options, removing the need to maintain and replenish this aging system. And it kind of makes sense, right? In the 1970s and 80s, NASA needed its own communication system because little to none were available commercially yet. In later decades, the commercial systems that were launched were still dedicated to niche markets like TV or radio communications, and those options have been rather limited until recently. But things have changed quite a bit in the last decade, with not only a much more diverse market of large communication satellites in geostationary orbit, but also large satellite internet constellations in low Earth orbit like Starlink or OneWeb. With this proposal, the idea now is to move beyond communications in Earth orbit and move to establish commercial relay satellite constellations around the Moon and also Mars. The RFP acknowledges that this will be useful not just for NASA, but also for others that may operate on each world, stating, quote, "The long-term goal is to establish a commercial space marketplace that supports a multitude of reliable, robust, and cost-effective commercial service providers, in which NASA is one of many customers." Companies have until August 13th to submit their proposals to NASA, and I'm sure that it won't be long until we see the details of some of them. SpaceX and T-Mobile have begun commercial services of Starlink's direct-to-cell in the United States. Now, you might recall back in February, the companies opened up a beta direct-to-cell program that allowed users on the ground to connect to Starlink through LTE connectivity, which is pretty useful when there's no cell towers around you. Now, don't expect to be calling people or browsing and watching videos just yet on the service, because it's still a low-bandwidth connectivity. Right now, the service only has texting capabilities, although SpaceX says that starting later this year, it should be able to support data for applications that may not need a lot of bandwidth. Back in February, the direct-to-cell constellation was still growing, and there was a lot of testing to be done to properly deliver this service, hence why the program was in beta. It was also rolled out to other countries like New Zealand, Japan, and Australia with some of their local carriers. But the direct-to-cell constellation was finally completed in June, meaning that the more than 600 satellites that were planned for it were in orbit. Now that is what has allowed companies like T-Mobile to phase out the beta program and start a wider commercial offering of it. The service in the United States will now not only be available to T-Mobile users, but also to those of Verizon and AT&T. It'll be interesting to see how resilient the constellation will be, given the limitations of the current generation of satellites, and as more and more people begin to actively use this service. Out at Starbase, SpaceX has returned the remains of Booster 13's aft section to dry land. NSF first reported this last week when a strange ship named LB Jill had arrived in the area. The company used this vessel during the weekend to fish out hardware from the water about 11.5 nautical miles off the coast of Mexico and brought it back to the port of Brownsville earlier this week. This booster had flown on Starship's 6th flight back in November of last year and unfortunately had to divert to a water splashdown due to an issue with the launch tower. So why on earth did SpaceX take the effort to go and salvage it 8 months after that? We really don't know. It could be anything from gathering further engineering data from it, to environmental cleanup, to simply just protecting important proprietary and export control data relating to the engine design. In any case, this has become a great opportunity to see another one of these aft sections up close. It's rare nowadays to see the internals of a Starship booster or ship due to the upgrades at Starbase's processing facility. So this was useful to spot, for example, the plumbing for the booster landing tank, or the ice filters used in the liquid oxygen tank to not clog the engine plumbing. It truly is some real Texas tank watching, only a bit more rusty, but just a bit. This week, Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp showed off more progress on the company's Blue Moon Mark 1 lander. In the picture shared by Limp, we can see the lander's mid-module covered in spray-on foam insulation at the company's surface coating facility located at the Kennedy Space Center. Blue had recently shared a previous update showing the arrival of the mid-module to the site in June. The lander's mid-module is mainly composed of the spacecraft's liquid hydrogen tank, which gets to really cold cryogenic temperatures, hence why it needs to be covered in foam for insulation. This lander is about the size of the Apollo lunar module, but unlike it, this uses cryogenic propellants, with this large hydrogen tank forming the main body of the spacecraft, and 4 smaller liquid oxygen tanks located closer to the bottom of the lander. The company is slowly putting together all of the pieces for the first Blue Moon Mark 1 lander, and intends to fly the first one to the moon later this year. That said, it's going to be interesting to see which may be ready first, the lander or the rocket, given that it's supposed to launch on New Glenn at some point. Right now, that rocket's second launch will be carrying NASA's Escapade, and it may not take place until the last quarter of the year. So schedules are going to be really tight if the company wants to launch this one before 2025 ends. Another company that's showing off hardware this week is Firefly, which recently shared a series of pictures of the transfer tube for its upcoming Eclipse rocket. And yes, that's transfer tube, not downcomer. The update shows the company is preparing this piece of hardware for structural testing at the company's test site in Briggs, Texas. Firefly says that at full thrust, this line will be carrying almost 4,000 pounds per second of liquid oxygen. That's about 1.8 metric tons for those who use metric. The transfer tube, as the name implies, is what allows the liquid oxygen to transfer from the main tank down to the engine section to be used by Eclipse's Miranda engines. The company is aiming to have a full-flight first stage by the end of the year to start launches of the Antares 330 rocket in 2026, so the more progress they make, the closer they are to the launch pad. But wait, there's more! Believe it or not, Astra shared footage this week of engine testing for the company's Rocket 4 vehicle. Not much detail was given, but it is presumed that the engine seen here is a developmental engine for the rocket's first stage engines. 2 of these engines will power Rocket 4, and while largely based on Firefly's own Reaver engines, they include several modifications to make it compatible with the rocket and Astra's manufacturing. According to the company, the test seen here in slow motion is the startup sequence to test a new combustion chamber for this first stage engine. Hopefully, after all of the financial troubles and failures of the past, the company can start getting back on track and fly Rocket 4 in the not-too-distant future. After years of debate, astronomers have finally detected that Betelgeuse has indeed been hiding a stellar secret, a nearby companion star. Betelgeuse is one of the 10 brightest stars in the night sky, with its light taking an estimated 640 years to reach us. The star is approximately 700 times larger in diameter than our sun, but being a dense red supergiant, it has a mass that's around 8 to 20 times greater. You'll find it marking the shoulder of Orion, the hunter, in the sky. Astronomers were concerned about 5 years ago when the star's brightness fell by almost 2/3 and wondered if it might be an indication that the star was about to go supernova. The Great Dimming, as it was later referred to, was eventually explained as a large plume of dust ejected from the star that temporarily blocked its light from reaching Earth. Nevertheless, Betelgeuse is near the end of its life and could explode in a supernova sometime in the next 100,000 years, putting on quite a light show in the sky when it does. Now, all of this extra attention lately has led astronomers to eventually find this stellar +1, which has never been seen before. Periodic changes in Betelgeuse's luminosity, or variability periods as they're known, led some to propose that this was due to the influence of a celestial companion. But even wheeling in the Hubble Space Telescope and the Chandra X-ray Observatory to help with the search had drawn a blank. That is, until recently. 2 studies published this week revealed that the high-resolution Gemini North Telescope in Hawaii was able to detect a second star around 6 magnitudes fainter in an incredibly tight orbit around Betelgeuse. This companion is a young blue-white protostar, a stellar object that has yet to begin hydrogen fusion in its core. The detection was made using the Allo-Peke instrument, which uses a short exposure technique called speckle imaging to remove distortions caused by Earth's atmosphere. This is the first time a close stellar companion has been detected orbiting a supergiant star, and astronomers are looking forward to an even better view in November of 2027 when the pair will be at their furthest separation. From stars potentially going supernova, we move on to a planet potentially being born. Using a different telescope, this time in Chile, astronomers believe that they've observed a planet in the making, around 440 light-years away. The Very Large Telescope is located in the Atacama Desert and is actually a system of 4 telescopes, each with an 8.2-meter mirror. The 4 can operate individually or together as an interferometer. The telescope enabled a protoplanetary disk of gas and dust to be observed around the star HD 135444b. The disk has prominent swirling spiral arms, and the emerging world is estimated to be twice the size of Jupiter as it grows into a fully formed planet. Now, it's not the first time astronomers have observed spiral structures on a disk around a young star. These intricate patterns have long been predicted to be caused by baby planets, or protoplanets as they're called, sweeping up material as they orbit their parent star. But this is the first time that we've likely caught one in the act of forming. Researchers believe they found a protoplanet candidate at the base of one of the star's spiral arms using the Enhanced Resolution Imager and Spectrograph, or ARIS instrument. ARIS is a high-contrast infrared imager mounted on one of the telescopes. It uses a coronagraph to block out the glare of the host star, along with the speckle imaging technique mentioned earlier, to help detect the faint signal of a forming planet embedded in the dusty disk. According to another study published this month, the ARIS instrument has also observed a different young star with yet another mysterious companion. V960 Mon is surrounded by a series of spiral arms and, due to gravitational instability, is orbited by large clumps of fragmenting material that's contracting and collapsing. The exact nature of this companion object is not yet clear. It could be a planet in the process of forming, or maybe a brown dwarf, an object larger than a planet, but without enough mass to ignite and shine like a star. We'll keep watching the skies as these stories, quite literally, evolve. You might recall our recent story about an interstellar visitor, the third of its kind ever to be discovered. As the object gets closer and closer, new observations of 3I Atlas have revealed even more detail about its size and origin. The object is currently tracking through the inner solar system at a speed of around 61 kilometers per second and is now considered to be an interstellar comet. Early estimates suggested it to have a diameter of around 10 to 20 kilometers, but new observations suggest that the nucleus is likely to be much smaller, with estimates ranging from 1 to 5 kilometers, depending on the brightness of its surrounding coma. The object is on a hyperbolic trajectory, which means it's only passing through our solar system one time and will then continue its high-speed journey onward into interstellar space. This comet is less active compared to our previous interstellar visitor 2I Borisov, which means it's currently releasing less gas and dust as it makes its approach. Further analysis of the orbit suggests the object could have originated in the thick disk that sits above and below the main plane of our Milky Way. This would potentially age the object at over 8 billion years old, making it perhaps twice the age of our Sun, and therefore the oldest comet ever seen. It'll reach its closest point to our Sun, or perihelion as it's known, around October 29th, but this will also make it harder to observe for a while, as the Earth will be on the other side of the Sun during that time. 3I Atlas is currently inside the orbit of Jupiter and approaching Mars, which it will pass in October. While the comet doesn't yet have a prominent tail, this is expected to change as it journeys through the asteroid belt. The sun's radiance should warm the surface enough to sublimate ice and release materials, which experts then anticipate could form a large coma, perhaps a tail, and should enable them to draw more conclusions about its size and chemical composition. More observations will be made using the Hubble and James Webb telescopes in August, and even the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter could get a view as the comet does a flyby less than 0.2 astronomical units away. We're keeping our eyes peeled for even better views as our interstellar visitor steps into frame for its big close-up. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with news about another observatory, and this one seems to be on the move. Spain has proposed a €400 million investment to relocate the planned 30-meter telescope to the Canary island of La Palma. The telescope has faced over a decade of opposition at its preferred site on Mauna Kea in Hawaii by native Hawaiians who consider the mountain to be sacred. The groups also object to the dozen observatories already located on its summit. A move to La Palma would offer a solution to the ongoing legal battles and protests, which have hindered progress since the project began in 2014. La Palma is known for its excellent stargazing conditions and already hosts the Observatorio del Roque de los Muchachos. This observatory houses 13 international telescopes representing a diverse set of countries across Europe, Asia, and North America. While half as high above sea level, the site in Punta Gorda is over 2 kilometers in altitude and would require only half the operating costs. With all the paperwork now in place, the consortium needs to decide whether to push on and build the 18-story telescope on the Canary Island. It's estimated to take 10 years to build, generating many jobs in the process. If approved, work would begin next spring. The Japanese space agency JAXA has successfully conducted a static fire of its H3 rocket in a new configuration. The test was conducted at the Tanegashima Space Center between July 23rd and 24th and fired a first stage of the vehicle for around 25 seconds. Unlike the H322S, which has flown 5 times so far, the new H330 variant has a cleaner and lighter design with no solid boosters. Instead, the number of LE9 engines on the first stage has been stepped up from 2 to 3. This week's testing also demonstrated the movement of the vehicle from the assembly building, the loading of propellant, thrust vector control, and verified communications between the rocket and the tracking station. The maiden flight of the H330 is currently set for no earlier than the third quarter of 2025. A number of payloads are being prepared for this first mission to sun-synchronous orbit, including a study of star formation history and a survey of the sky in ultraviolet light. The mission will also conduct some tests to help reduce space debris. One will demonstrate a post-mission disposal device using atmospheric resistance, while the STARS-X autonomous satellite aims to demonstrate debris capture using a space tether. Space Pioneer has now completed dress rehearsals in preparation for the launch of its Tianlong 3. The company has shared a video showing the completed launch pad and infrastructure at its own facility within the Zhochuan Satellite Launch Center. As we reported last week, the 2-stage Tianlong 3 is very similar in size, design, and payload capacity to SpaceX's Falcon 9. Its engines burn the same mix of liquid kerosene, or RP1, and liquid oxygen, and the similarities don't stop there. Just like the Falcon 9, the first stage has 4 grid fins to guide it back to Earth, while 4 retractable landing legs will be used in later flights for propulsive landings. Space Pioneer is initially planning to recover and refly its boosters up to 10 times. This month's rehearsals used a mock-up vehicle simulator and covered a variety of verification tests. These ranged from the horizontal transportation of the vehicle from the assembly building to raising it vertical on the pad and connecting it to the ground service equipment. We're still waiting on a date for its maiden flight and hoping we don't have to wait too long for Tianlong. Now let's take a quick look at what's happened in space this week and see what's coming up next week in spaceflight. This week we had mostly Falcon 9 launches with a Starlink mission from Vandenberg to start off the week. SpaceX also launched 2 customer missions on Falcon 9, the first one being, once again, an internet satellite constellation. The mission, launching from Florida, carried the 9th and 10th O3b mPOWER satellites into medium Earth orbit for Luxembourg-based SES. With this mission, only one more remains until the completion of this constellation, which will launch the remaining 3 O3b mPOWER satellites. The other customer mission took place from Vandenberg and was carrying NASA's TRACERS mission. TRACERS, which stands for Tandem Reconnection and Cusp Electrodynamics Reconnaissance Satellites, consists of 2 satellites flying in tandem around the Earth. The TRACERS spacecraft will be measuring magnetic reconnection, a process by which the Earth's magnetic field lines disconnect and reconnect, discharging ionized particles down into our own atmosphere. Along for the ride on this mission were 8 other payloads, which included more satellites for the study of Earth's magnetic field, as well as experimental communication payloads. The 3 Falcon 9 launches were followed by a Soyuz launch from Vostochny right at the end of the week. The mission carried 2 Ionosphere M satellites, completing the Russian Ionosphere M constellation of satellites. These satellites are set to measure Earth's ionosphere and magnetosphere. It's definitely been a week for that, hasn't it? The mission also carried 18 additional payloads, all CubeSats, including an experimental Iranian communications satellite. Going into next week, we'll have a week packed with activity. For starters, we've got up to 4 Starlink missions, 2 from Florida and 2 from Vandenberg. On top of that, we've got the 5th flight of the European Vega C rocket from French Guiana. The mission, set to launch as soon as this weekend, will be carrying 2 missions in one single launch for CNES, the French space agency. One of the missions, the Constellation Optique in 3D, also known as CO3D, consists of 4 Earth observation satellites which will map Earth's surface in great detail in order to create 3D maps of the globe. The other mission is a single small satellite riding along called MicroCarb and is set to map where carbon dioxide is created and absorbed on Earth at a global scale. Next week on July 30th, we're also expecting the launch of a GSLV Mark II from India carrying the NISAR spacecraft. NISAR, which stands for NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar, is an Earth observation satellite born of a collaboration between the American and Indian space agencies. Several of the satellite systems have been provided by NASA, while ISRO is the one launching launching the mission and provided the satellite bus as well as some of the instruments. Next week, we're also hoping to see Australian company Gilmore Space finally attempting its maiden launch of its Eris rocket, which had to be delayed from a July 16th debut to July 26th. Let's hope that this one is the final attempt. And it's not just Starlinks that SpaceX will be launching next week, as the company is also aiming to fly its next human spaceflight mission, Crew 11. The mission is currently set to launch no earlier than July 31st at 1609 UTC from Launch Complex 39A in Florida. It'll be SpaceX's 11th crew rotation mission to the International Space Station and will feature the 6th flight of Crew Dragon Endeavour, the most flights of any Dragon capsule to date. Teams are currently preparing the launch pad and hardware for that mission. The transporter erector at LC-39A rolled back to the hangar this Thursday, and Endeavour was transported for mating to its rocket. NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Michael Fink will serve as commander and pilot for this mission. Both of them will be accompanied by mission specialist and JAXA astronaut Kimia Yui and mission specialist and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov. Next week, we may also have a few launches from China, including the return to flight for the Hyperbola 1 rocket, as well as the launch of another batch of Guowang internet satellites. There's also the potential for the launch of a HASTE mission from Wallops, Virginia, carrying a secretive hypersonic payload. As always, a lot of these dates and missions can change over time, so we recommend that you check nextspaceflight.com for the latest updates, or download the app to your phone. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Alicia Siegel for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.